Can you believe it? Something more urgent than New World screwworm. I teased New World screwworm in the intro because that also was found in the United States just a few weeks ago in June. But today we're going to be talking about something that's going to be more of a problem for our producers in Kansas than screwworm is going to be this year, at least as far as I can predict. And that's tar spot of corn. On June 17th, the first reports of tar spot of corn were detected in Republic County, Kansas, and then just 2 days later, on June 19th, tar spot was also detected in Washington County, Kansas. Now, if you've been staying abreast of the changes in plant pathology and new crop diseases that have been introduced into Kansas over the past 3 or 4 years, then you're no stranger to the concept of tar spot, although for most of us, it probably hasn't come to our fields yet. However, we have noticed that in Washington and Republic counties, right here in our home extension district, we are some of the first casualties of this novel disease that's just new to Kansas in the past several years. So that's something that we need to be keeping an eye out for, especially as our corn crop continues to grow and develop throughout July and August. Tar spot is a fungal disease that has the potential to have major consequences on the productivity of our corn crop, so it's something that we need to pay close attention to. But for the purposes of explaining more about what the disease is, how it arises, and what the consequences are of having it in your field, I'm actually going to allow Rodrigo Onofre, who is our K-State Extension row crop plant pathology specialist, what a mouthful, to explain it in a little more detail, far better than I could, so that we have a good understanding of what exactly we're dealing with here.
Putting in on that crop to protect that yield, right?
Tar spot.
So, yes, that's a good question. So tar spot, it's not new to us anymore, right? We found it here in Kansas for the first time maybe 2-3 years ago, and I think we have learned a lot in the last years in terms.
How can growers identify tar spot?
Typically tar spot, it's not. I think there are a lot of look-alike things that looks just like tar spot. For me, if you get a wet cloth and trying to clean that leaf, will kind of like disappear, but tar spot will still remain there. The tar lesion, what you do and what not to do, right? So tar spot is one of the corn diseases that we see that survives in corn residue. So folks that have had tar spot before, they're going to be dealing with this disease for a long time. Think about it to us is, yes, tar spot is here, is active, and it's now more than ever to intensify our scouting efforts. Early, aggressive that you really don't want to be, again, behind and playing catch. So typically we observe growth stage, so that's when we start seeing the disease in the field. But honestly, we want to make sure that where you are, if you have, I think there are a couple of things that we should talk today that are important regarding tar spot. Number one, fairly important because by now we know that there are some hybrids still high yielding off that investment, right? So in terms of talk about fungicide, right? Your best bet would be between V10 and tasseling for your first application. Tar spot, just keep in mind that you have a lot of things, right? What we have seen too is 2 and 3 mode of actions are typically, and 1, of course, is better than the side application. I think there are a lot of things to keep in mind, right? Number one, the weather conditions, what's the risk for the next few weeks, how much tar spot you're seeing in the field, what's your hybrid susceptibility. I think all those things, they have to be together, right? It's all part of your toolbox there for you to make that decision.
But what impact does it actually have on the crop?
Billions and billions of dollars. It's one of the spots for why, right? It's the main disease that we're fighting pretty much every year. And
like Rodrigo mentioned in that audio segment, which was taken from an Agriculture Today podcast episode from last year, tar spot of corn is a fungal disease. And because of that, we would expect it to thrive in wetter environments. In fact, tar spot tends to thrive whenever it's summer growing conditions in corn that are wetter and cooler than normal. Now, we'd usually think that wetter and cooler conditions for our corn crop would be advantageous for productivity. But of course, it's not just good for our corn crop, it's also good for all of the pathogens and diseases, and frankly, weeds too, that are competing for the same resources in the same space that our crop is. I've pulled up this website, agweather.com, because it provides a really great resource for us to understand what's going on lately in our environments. So if I look over here to local weather, what I can see is by entering, say, Belleville, Kansas, in Republic County, I can also bring up historical information and click on precipitation year to date. So what I'll see whenever I load this is that our precipitation totals, which show up as this blue line here, we're looking at 17.72 inches of precipitation. But what's interesting to note is that a outsized portion of the precipitation that we've received has been since, what's this date here? April 11th. So basically, for the entirety of the corn growing season for our area, from early mid-April, sitting at 5.7 inches to 17.7 inches, we've gotten 12 inches of rainfall just in the past 2 months and some change. And we're sitting here well above average of where we are for the year. Now, like I mentioned, tar spot really enjoys those cooler, wetter conditions. So we've definitely got the wet on our side. Let's take a look at our temperature year to date. So what we'll see is that we had a lot of these warmer days back in February and March. But what we see now is that we've got nighttime lows that are lower here, daytime highs that are lower here. Now we do get the sporadic high temperatures from time to time. But even so, I mean, looking at the time that we would start planting here in early mid-April, the warmest temperature that we've had in Belleville is reported at 93 degrees, which quite honestly is not that astonishing for as far as we've made it in the summer. And then you consider the past 2 weeks or so, going back here to June 10th, we haven't really cracked above 84 degrees, which is kind of remarkable if you think about it. We did have one day that was 87. But a lot of these days had lower lows than usual, a low of 52 on June 12th, a low of 52 on June 15th. So really what we're seeing is that for the portion of the growing season, we haven't had conditions that would kind of crowd out tar spot from developing. We've had conditions that would be advantageous to it developing. So I'm going to use another example by looking at Washington, Kansas. This is the other county in our district where we found it so far. And we'll just start by looking at temperatures as well. As you see, these wild fluctuations here, basically up until we started planting. And then we kind of get a distribution where we'll occasionally pop above, but we'll also occasionally pop below. And a lot of it is lying below these average highs and average lows. So a really interesting distribution to think about whenever we think about the temperatures. And what we'll also see with the precipitation in Washington, which is not to anyone's surprise because it's close enough to Belleville that we expect similar trends, is that we're sitting here at almost 19 inches of rainfall. And compared to where we were on April 10th, that's a 13 inches of rainfall just between April 10th and June 24th, the day that I'm recording this. So quite a bit of precipitation accumulating in the time that we would be growing our corn crop. Another website that I've found useful for tracking this kind of stuff is the Iowa Environmental Mesonet. Now, that website's navigation is actually a little bit complicated. So I actually embedded it into our K-State Extension River Valley District website, which you can see here, rivervalley.kstate.edu, just to simplify the navigation so it's easier for everybody. So by clicking on program areas in the homepage, and coming down here to agriculture and natural resources, and then clicking on meteorology and weather, what we can find if we scroll to the bottom is this icon called the Iowa Environmental Mesonet. And then what we can basically do here is choose our parameters to see where does this growing season rank in terms of temperature and precipitation compared to the database that we have available back to the late 1800s. So if we focus on Kansas, looking at climate district, because that's as granular of a level as we can get, so we'd be in the north central climate district, but we want to include the entirety of this year's growing season for corn. So we'll choose option number 2, and then we'll pick our date here as April 1st, since that's the first date that we could have considered planting our corn, if only for the insurance components of it. And then we'll come down here to June, bring it up to present day. Total precipitation, same time period, and reverse the color map. What we'll find is that now we're over here just on the edge of the north central region climate reporting district. But if we go directly to our east, they've had top 5, top 6 wettest periods from March 31st to June 23rd. And to our south, they've had top 25. We're at 41, but that's, remember, including all of these counties here. So since we're on the border of here, here, and here, it's not far-fetched to assume that we've had probably a top 30 wettest corn growing season to date.
The way that tar spot affects the corn plant is simple and straightforward. Those black lesions that appear on the plant, on the leaf specifically, called stromata, are basically competing with the cells of the corn leaf for the resources that are being brought into the plant through photosynthesis. And also, as those lesions accumulate on the leaf, it's reducing the amount of area of the leaf that can be used to photosynthesize sunlight into sugars to help the plant. Depending on the variety that you have and their sensitivity to the disturbances in the photosynthetic process, sometimes the corn plant can lose between zero point 0.3 to up to 1.4 bushels per acre for every percent of the ear leaf that gets covered by those black stromata. So if you have a pretty severe case uh, in your field, you could see damages up to 50 to 75% of what you would normally expect in the absence of the tar spot disease. But that's also part of the reason that it's very hard to forecast how severe, in terms of yield loss, disease is going to be in any particular field, is because it all varies based off of how much of a concentration or severity of those stromata are taking place on the corn plants that are in the field. However, one of the trends that has been identified over the course of the several years that this disease has been researched in the Midwest is that the earlier maturing corn hybrids don't tend to have as severe of outbreaks as the late maturing hybrids. And the reason is suspected is that whenever you have an earlier maturing hybrid, the tar spot disease doesn't have as much time to work with to build up on the leaves of the corn plant. So by the time that harvest rolls around, you haven't had as severe of an accumulation of those tar spot stromata on the corn plant leaves as you would with a later maturing variety. If you have a variety that's maturing later in the season, that tar spot, as soon as it's entered the field, it has started to accumulate in the plant more and more, and it has more time to do that before the time that the plant is fully mature. So that's why they observe that those later maturing varieties tend to have a tougher go of it than the earlier maturing varieties. However, of course, part of that also generates a trade off in terms of the length of our season in determining our yield in the absence of tar spot. So if you have an earlier maturing variety, or shall we say a shorter season corn hybrid, on average, they're going to be having lower yields than your longer season corn hybrids,
Now, of
simply because.
course, one of the things that's going to help us keep track of the progression of corn tar spot in Kansas is scouting. And as people throughout the state are scouting, they could report it in several locations. The one that I have pulled up for you here is a collaboration with Kansas Corn. All you have to do is go to kscorn.com/corn-disease, and it'll take you to this website where you'll see corn disease tracker. And if you scroll down, you can look at this tar spot map. We'll be able to see all the places where corn tar spot has been found. Now, this legend over here shows that the grayed out counties show where it has been found in previous years, but has not yet been found this year. And as you can see, in 2026, the concentration of detections of corn tar spot have been in this corridor here from north central Nebraska down into north central Kansas, and some sporadic detections here in central Iowa, central Missouri, and central Indiana as well. But we're really kind of getting the brunt of it here in this region here to start off the year. Another great resource is going to the Crop Protection Network website, which is a collaboration of numerous land grant universities with their research and extension apparatuses working together to take care of some of our key problems in production agriculture. So if I go to cropprotectionnetwork.org/publications and I click here on corn, if I click on categories, diseases, I can see all these different publications. But the one that I want to show you right now is about 3 down. It's fungicide efficacy for control of corn foliar diseases. It was just recently updated at the end of February this year. And what I can do is if I download this guide, I now have access to this publication. Now, scrolling down to the second page, what you'll see is this big old table. What it does is it provides me ratings for various active ingredients and product names of various fungicides that are on the market right now, and whether or not they're labeled and their effectiveness for controlling particular diseases. So we'll see these efficacy categories from poor to excellent, or whether or not it's labeled or not, as well as indexing what fungicide mode of action is being used in that product. For example, an active ingredient that we have in some of our fungicides, azoxystrobin. We look over here, it's not labeled for tar spots. So this is just an illustration of how we can kind of narrow down the various products and active ingredients that we can consider when we're going to think about making a fungicide application. And the ones that we're going to be looking for in this table are going to be ones that are G or VG, which is good or very good. As of right now, based on this publication, there are no active ingredients or products that are rated excellent for the control of tar spot. And as the list goes down, you can see that there's actually a number of different products that you can use for controlling tar spot. And one of the things that you want to consider is looking at this kind of matrix formula here is, well, can we kill multiple birds with one stone? Now, we know that whenever we're dealing with tar spot, once you detect tar spot in the field and identify the severity of the problem, you can make a decision on whether you're going to pull the trigger on a fungicide application. But it may also be useful, also based on the severity and the risk of other potential diseases, to decide whether or not we want to choose a product that's also going to be good at controlling for other diseases. So if you have something like gray leaf spot or southern rust, that's going to be something that you might want to think about whenever you're deciding which product in particular am I going to use for my fungicide application. But that's just an example of a great resource that you can use. Again, going to cropprotectionnetwork.org/publications, filter down to corn and diseases, and you'll see that the foliar fungicide efficacy ratings for corn. The last resource I want to talk about is going to be our plant disease diagnostic lab. So if you go to K-State's Department of Plant Pathology website, which is plantpath.kstate.edu,
and go over to the Extension tab. Click on Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab. There's a form that you can use to submit specimens for evaluation for various crop diseases. What you'll notice whenever you download the sample submission form for the Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab is that the form is kind of designed to cater to an extension agent who is receiving a sample from a client to then submit to the lab. However, that does not preclude anyone from filling out the form on their own and submitting it to the lab directly. It's just a service that we offer to all of our clients in each of our extension units, so that all you basically have to do is provide information to contact you and all the information that you know about that is pertinent to your particular case that you're wanting to evaluate. Whenever you provide this form or assist your local extension agent in filling out this form, along with submitting the sample to the Plant Disease Diagnostic Lab, then that lab is able to evaluate whether or not your field has corn tar spot in it. And if it does come back to be a confirmed positive case, not only will we use that to update all of our tracking mechanisms to keep track of the disease across the state, but we'll also be able to help you directly by providing recommendations and analysis for how to best go about managing for corn tar spot to make sure that you're maintaining productivity and efficiency on your farm despite the challenges that arise from diseases. Recent history has not given us a strong indication of whether or not early season detections of corn tar spot translate to higher severity later in the season. In fact, just a couple years ago, we had a detection in Kansas as early as late May, and the year turned out to be kind of a dud in terms of the severity of corn tar spot in the state. So rather than being able to forecast how bad it's going to be later in the season, especially as we get into those critical time periods between tasseling all the way to R3, it's going to be very important for us to just keep tabs on what the situation is like, not just on a macro scale by keeping track of all the tracking mechanisms, but it's also going to be important to make sure that we're scouting our own fields to know what the conditions are like there and whether or not we're at risk of developing corn tar spot there as well. In order to keep yourself updated on all the latest information that's coming out regarding corn tar spot, make sure that you're tuning here to Gab in the Cab every other week, and we'll hopefully be able to provide more updates as we find out more information and kind of supplement our other episode content. Also, make sure that you're keeping up with all of the content that's being released by River Valley Extension District, as well as the K-State Extension Agronomy's e-updates that are released every week. That's all we have for this episode. I'm Luke Byers, and you've been listening to and or watching Gab in the Cab. We'll see you next time.